Good morning, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about Isaiah 8 from the middle of chapter 8 till the end of chapter 8. So, in the previous video, we covered from beginning of 8 till the middle of 8. And we covered that it once again has this chiastic structure, that sandwich structure, where it begins with message of hope, and then it has message of doom, and then it goes back to message of hope. That was the last video. From this point on, chapter 8, 11 till the end of the chapter, this is apart from that sandwich structure. It's a little separate. The theme goes on, however, and it's a theological reflection on the whole experience. Okay, it's a little vague, but it really is building on this oracle that had been given from chapter 7, 1 and on. Okay, so let's look on this passage. For the Lord spoke thus to me with his strong hand upon me and warned me not to walk in the way of this people, saying. For the Lord spoke thus to me. So, you know how in the previous video I talked about how Maher Shalharashbaz is the interim or immediate fulfillment of the Emmanuel prophecy that had been given to Ahaz. And make sure, by the way, you look at the description and download that my notes, because it's so much easier to see what I'm saying if you have that PDF file like in a chart form that compares this, the structure of chapter 8 and chapter 7 and how it shows the fulfillment there. But in chapter 7, the Emmanuel prophecy had been given to King Ahaz. Remember, Isaiah went to the city of David, Jerusalem, King Ahaz, and told him, ask for a sign from the Lord and so on. So it was like a public proclamation. There were other people. It was openly spoken. But look that in 8:11, however, also in 8:1, but 8:11, the Lord spoke thus to me. Okay, we see this sense of enclosedness. This is it's not meant to be like a public knowledge, at least for then. Now it is, of course, but for some reasons, this part is a little secluded. It's a little closed off from other people, and it will come once again later. But just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind that this isn't given to King Ahaz. Okay, this will become more important later in chapter 9. Okay, so for the Lord spoke thus to me. Me is Isaiah. Verse 12. Do not call conspiracy all that this people calls conspiracy, and do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall honor as holy. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense and a rock of stumbling to both houses of Israel, a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many shall stumble on it. They shall fall and be broken. They shall be snared and taken. So, what is this saying? The whole idea is give attention first to God. Don't be sucked into this conspiracy that these people are talking about. Don't fear what they're fearing, but focus on God. But important thing is the stone of offense. God is going to be a stone of offense. Okay? He will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense. Remember, this rock and stone imagery is very commonly used, especially in the Psalms, to refer to God. He is a solid rock, right? It's someone you can rely on and trust on. But here, that sanctuary, that holy stone, rock, is supposed to be stone of offense. And what does that mean? Those who do not trust God would find that God tripped them up by bringing judgment upon them. That's what God is talking about. So this same rock, depending on your heart, depending on the person's heart of how that person relates to God, that rock can be a rock of solid foundation, or that same rock can be a rock of stumbling. People are going to say, because of rock, we stumble. Because of God, we're being judged. That's how people are going to respond, says God to Isaiah, foretelling the future. Okay, so God is telling Isaiah about this. And verse 16. And verse 15 ends with the quotation mark. Okay, verse 15 closes off the quotation. This is the words of God, but it's an end. And verse 16 is Isaiah speaking. Bind up the testimony, says Isaiah. Seal the teaching among my disciples, Isaiah's disciples. I, Isaiah, will wait for the Lord who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Okay, so Isaiah is saying, yes, I will fear God. I will place my hope in God. So Isaiah is showing a good example of how he should be relating to God. Verse 18, behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells on Mount Zion. And when they say to you, inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living? To the teaching and to the testimony. If they will not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn. They will pass through the land, greatly distressed and hungry. And when they are hungry, they will be enraged and will speak contemptuously against their king and their God, and turn their faces upward. They will look to the earth, but behold distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into the darkness. So that was the end of the chapter. I just read the whole till the end of the chapter. But let me go back to verse 16, okay? It says, bind up the testimony and seal the teaching among my disciples. Once again, this motif of closing off this oracle or limiting the audience of this is repeated here. As it was already said in verse 11, the Lord spoke thus to me. Okay? This is important because the Emmanuel prophecy that had been given to Ahaz is fulfilled in Maher, Isaiah's son, in the immediate fulfillment. But the question becomes, how does Matthew understand this passage to be applying to Jesus? Okay? If it's fulfilled in Maher, why is Matthew expecting another fulfillment of Jesus and saying that it is a fulfillment of Jesus? You have to understand this whole prophecy, this child prophecy in chapter 7 through 12. It's called, it's a child. There are a lot of children come out. There's two children, Shear Yashuv and Maher Shalashbas of Isaiah. There's another child for us. For to us a child is born, Emmanuel, and so on. There's a lot of this child. Child is supposed to be representative of this weekly figure. But the reason why I'm I should say, the reason I'm highlighting this chapter 8 being an oracle given by God to Isaiah, and this oracle having been more, it's not publicly announced, is because Isaiah is building upon what he had told to King Ahaz. He's building upon that prophecy something greater. Okay? So, you know how God tells us information progressively. He tells information about the coming one throughout history to different people in different periods. Isaiah also seemingly is told by God about this coming child in a progressive revelation. So when he told King Ahaz, hey, Emmanuel's gonna come and that's supposed to be a sign of hope for you. But then God later adds on to that and says to Isaiah some amazing things that applies not to his son Maher, but something greater in the future. Okay, but the important thing, what I'm trying to get to is that Isaiah, there are different parts of this oracle from chapter 7 through 12 that is given to Ahaz, but then there is a part that is not given to Ahaz, and that awaits fulfillment in the far future. And that Matthew will pick up and say is a fulfillment. So it's a little complicated, but just wait till chapter 9 and we'll see how this comes. And one more thing in verse 17. I will wait for the Lord who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. There's a beautiful theme. There's a beautiful motif of waiting in the book of Isaiah. Think back. in Isaiah 6, when Isaiah sees the holy vision of God sitting on the throne and he gets commissioned as a prophet of God, remember that Isaiah, I'll volunteer. And God says, go to these people and harden their hearts. And then Isaiah asks back to God, for how long? How long do I need to preach this message that hardens their heart? God says, until destruction comes, you need to wait. Like after destruction comes, you may. Like really never, right? So Isaiah is supposed to wait. But remember that chapter 6, you can flip back. But the last line in chapter 6 says that there is holy stump. Remember that? The holy seed is its stump. It ends with this holy people, remnant, that is going to be there. And Isaiah is supposed to be waiting for that moment. And in chapter 32, in Isaiah 30, I'm skipping forward a little bit. But God says, therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you. Verse 18. Chapter 30, verse 18. And therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. Okay, the Lord waits to be gracious to you. So there, Isaiah here in our chapter 8, Isaiah is waiting for God. But in chapter 30, God is waiting for Judah. God is waiting for his people. So what's happening is God is waiting, but what is he waiting for? He's waiting for that moment to come when Judah will come to realize that she has no one to rely on, that hope comes from no one. Because in that context of chapter 30, they're going to Egypt seeking for alliance and help from them. God says, wait for my help, but Judah just sends her envoys to Egypt seeking help from Egypt instead of from God. And in that context, God says, I will wait. I'm going to wait. And God is going to wait until Judah comes to realization that Egypt cannot save them, or no other country or people can save them. Judah needs to come to that realization and hit rock hard bottom to be able to see God work. And God is waiting for that moment to come. So when that moment comes, the people of Judah will be ready to listen to God and come back to God and repent. For that moment, God is waiting. Okay? And we see that in our life where we try to solve problems with our own strength. We try to get by in our lives with our own plans and strategy, only to realize that there's going to come a time when all this fails and really, I can't do this. I need help from God. And that's when we open our eyes or our eyes get opened and see that God has been there offering his grace to us all this time. We just were not aware of it. We were not willing to take it. All right. So God is waiting for that moment. But going back to our text here in chapter 8, Isaiah is waiting for God. Isaiah is waiting for that time of hope to come. Okay. It's a beautiful picture if you really think about it. This idea of waiting. Okay. Remember that woman who had that bleeding disease for 12 years, spent all her money on a doctor, but no one could fix her. She's completely exhausted. She has no other hope. And that's when she meets Jesus. And that's when the nameless woman in the story, gets to be called daughter, right? Jesus calls her daughter. Right? After that encounter with Jesus, she becomes from nobody to the daughter of God. Right? This amazing transition happens. But what causes that transition is that she was in a desperate situation where all her money had been spent, all her hope had been disappointing her. And that's when Jesus met her. So this whole idea of waiting in Isaiah, just pay attention to that. It's really beautiful. God is waiting for Israel to be in that kind of state. And then God is going to work in her again. But here in chapter 8, it's Isaiah that's waiting for God to do that. Any other things? Inquire of the mediums. I think it's kind of self-explanatory for the rest of the chapter. long story short, because they don't trust God, they're gonna look to the earth and behold distress and darkness. So you're supposed to be waiting for the Lord. You're not waiting for the Lord. You're trying to not trust Him. And so distress will come. That's the end of chapter 8. And thankfully, starting from chapter 9, we'll go back to the hope. Remember, it goes back from doom to hope and back and forth. So from 9:1, it will go back to hope. But chapter 8 will end here with a note of gloom and darkness.